Hey everyone, Noir here. Let's get into today's Reddit story.
My husband's ex convinced him that I had cheated on him with my stepbrother and even claimed that the baby I was carrying wasn't his. In the end, we got divorced. Now, years later, he has suddenly come back wanting to meet the child he walked away from, but he has no idea that the truth waiting for him is far different from what he expects. His ex completely got inside his head. She made him believe I was pregnant with my stepbrother's baby, and because of that, he gave me an impossible choice: either agree to an abortion or agree to a divorce. I never cheated on him, and the thought of being with my stepbrother is honestly disgusting to me. I tried to tell him the truth over and over again, but he refused to believe me. Eventually, I had no choice but to leave. And now, after 10 years, he suddenly wants to see his child. Before I get into everything, I'm going to use fake names so it's easier for everyone to follow the story, including me. Here are the people involved: me, 35 years old; Nathan, 38, my current husband; Tyler, my stepbrother; Connor, my ex husband; Brooke, Connor's ex girlfriend from before we met. She's somewhere in her 30s, but I honestly don't know exactly how old she is. I'm going to do my best to explain everything clearly because this story is a combination of asking for advice, dealing with anxiety, and getting years of frustration off my chest instead of taking it out on the people around me. So, even if you're only here because you enjoy reading about strangers whose lives are a complete mess and you don't plan on giving any advice, that's completely fine. I just hope I can properly explain one of the hardest periods of my life. Before I get too caught up in the background, here's what's happening now. I recently found out that my ex husband has been asking people about me after almost 10 years of complete silence. He wants to see me. He also wants to see my child. Reading that in one sentence probably doesn't sound like a huge deal, but I hope that by the time you finish this story, you'll understand why hearing that completely turned my world upside down. When I was 24 years old, my best friend and I moved across the country to another state because we wanted a fresh start and the chance to build our adult lives somewhere new. About 6 months later, she was offered her dream job back in our hometown. Of course, I encouraged her to accept it. Unfortunately, that meant I was suddenly alone in a city where I barely knew anyone. Only 2 weeks after she moved away, I met Connor. At that point, I didn't have any close friends around me. I was still adjusting to my new job, and I felt lonely most of the time. Connor had recently broken up with the girl he had dated since high school. Looking back now, I think the timing made us rush into the relationship much faster than we should have. Within just a few weeks of meeting each other, he was spending almost every night at my apartment. Before long, it felt like we were already living together. I honestly believed I'd found the love of my life. He was in his final semester of college after changing majors a few times, and once he graduated, he planned to start working at his father's engineering company, which was about 30 minutes outside the city. For the first time since moving there, I started imagining a future in that place. Now, when I look back, I can clearly see the warning signs that were there from the very beginning. It's funny how hindsight always makes things seem so obvious. When his college graduation came around, I met more of his family. His mother was there, so was his ex girlfriend. I smiled, introduced myself politely, and genuinely tried to make a good impression. Brooke wasn't just an ex, she was practically part of the family, which made sense considering how many years they had been together. She was the classic girl next door. Her mother and Connor's mother had been best friends for years, so they had practically grown up together. Someone even told me that the day Connor and Brooke started dating had been one of the happiest days of his mother's life. Even after hearing that, I stayed positive. I was young, I was in love, and I wanted things to work. I sat beside his mother and did everything I could to get along with her. No matter how hard I tried, though, she never fully accepted me. Still, I kept trying. From that day on, Brooke became a constant part of my life. Connor always told me that it was difficult to completely cut her out because their families had been so close for so many years. I wanted to be understanding, so I accepted his explanation. I ignored the fact that she always held onto his arm whenever we were at family gatherings. I ignored all the affectionate nicknames she still called him. Then we'd go back to our apartment, which had quickly become our home together, and he'd tell me he loved me. And I believed him. He insisted he only stayed in contact with Brooke because he didn't want to hurt his family or upset his mother. Honestly, I understood that. I'm very close with my own family too. I would do anything for them. So I convinced myself that he was simply trying to protect his mother's feelings. About 8 months into our relationship, Connor proposed to me. Now I know something I didn't know back then. He proposed on the very same day he found out Brooke had started dating someone else. At the time, though, I was completely blinded by love. I happily accepted, even though he didn't even have a ring. Instead of questioning it, I told myself he had simply been so excited to ask me that he couldn't wait until he bought one. A year later, I was walking down the aisle, excited to become his wife. Back then, I truly believed marrying Connor would be the happiest day of my life. I hadn't seen my family for months, so having all of them together to celebrate with us meant everything to me. I couldn't wait to introduce everyone properly. Up until then, the only member of my family Connor had met was my stepbrother, Tyler, who had come to visit me a few months before the wedding. I didn't even let it bother me that Brooke showed up wearing a white dress. I ignored the fact that she danced with Connor almost as much as I did. Looking back now, I really should have paid attention. I brushed it off because I convinced myself Connor was only celebrating with someone who had been part of his life for years. After all, I had danced with my best friend and with my stepbrother, the two people I was closest to besides Connor. Looking back, that's exactly what I did throughout our entire marriage. I ignored every warning sign. I always found a reason to justify his behavior, especially whenever it involved Brooke. When I think about it now, that should have been the biggest red flag of all. For 2 years, I kept making excuses every time Connor put his ex girlfriend ahead of me, even though behind closed doors he called her obsessive, crazy, and plenty of other names whenever nobody else was around to hear it. I ignored it every time his mother compared me to Brooke. I stayed quiet whenever Brooke made one of her sarcastic comments disguised as a joke, or pretended she was only trying to be helpful. At the end of the day, Connor was my whole world, or at least that's what I believed. Every friendship I had made in that city existed because of him or because we were a couple. The only family connections I had nearby were through his family. Meanwhile, my own family lived several hours away in another state, and Connor never wanted to make the drive to visit them. He was all I had. Then I found out I was pregnant. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, I want to make one thing clear. There was never any abuse in our marriage. In some ways, that almost would have been easier to explain to my family and friends. Instead, what finally made me realize how much control Brooke still had over Connor was something even more unbelievable. He actually believed I was carrying my stepbrother's baby. Think about that for a second. Connor honestly convinced himself that the child I was pregnant with wasn't his. He believed I had cheated on him with Tyler, my own stepbrother. Since I lived far away from my hometown and Connor and I hadn't been together very long before getting married, he barely knew Tyler. The first time they met was early in our relationship when Tyler came to visit me. The second time was at our wedding. That was it. About a year and a half after we got married, I flew back home to celebrate my mother's 60th birthday. Connor didn't want to come with me, so I made the trip alone. About a month after I got back, I learned I was pregnant. I was excited. I honestly thought Connor would be thrilled. He had always talked about wanting a big family with lots of kids, and we had plenty of relatives and friends who were excited for us. Instead of celebrating with me, the very first words out of his mouth were, "She said this would happen." Even after almost 10 years, I remember those words perfectly. I had no idea what he was talking about. I just stood there completely confused. The only explanation he gave me was, "She warned me and I should have listened to her." That same night, he walked out of the apartment. He ignored every phone call I made. He never answered a single message. When he finally came back the next morning, he gave me two choices: either have an abortion or get a divorce. Eventually, after I kept demanding answers, he finally explained what had been going on. Brooke had spent months poisoning his mind. According to her, Tyler and I had acted inappropriately at our wedding. She convinced Connor that we were far too close for step-siblings. She said the way we hugged each other, the way we stood together in family pictures, and the amount of time we spent talking during the reception looked more like a couple than a brother and sister. She even went as far as telling him that I had only moved across the country because I was heartbroken after Tyler got a girlfriend. After our wedding, she kept feeding him lie after lie. She built an entire story out of tiny things she had seen on social media. Tyler lived in another state, but that didn't stop her. Then I traveled back home by myself to visit my family. A month later, I found out I was pregnant. That was all the proof Brooke needed to convince Connor that I had been sleeping with my stepbrother. Of course, I denied every accusation, because every single one of them was false. Tyler has always been like a real brother to me. We practically grew up together. The idea that something romantic had ever happened between us wasn't just ridiculous, it was insulting. But Connor didn't care. He refused to listen. He didn't care when I offered to take a DNA test. He didn't care when I showed him medical records proving I was already pregnant before I even traveled home. He didn't care when I completely broke down in tears and begged him to come back to reality. That was the moment I realized there was nothing left to save. As painful as it was, I packed my things, asked my employer for a transfer, and moved back home to be with my real family. Compared to everything else, the divorce itself was surprisingly straightforward. Ironically, it was Connor's mother who had insisted we sign a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. Since we didn't have many shared assets, everything moved quickly. Connor also refused to take a paternity test. Instead, he signed legal paperwork giving up every parental right to my unborn child. After that, I never heard another word from him, not once, until now. Now I've learned that he's been asking people where I am, and that he wants to meet both me and my son. That's why I'm so worried. My husband, Nathan, knows very little about Connor, or everything that happened in my first marriage. He knows I was married before. He knows it ended badly. That's about it. I'm almost certain it's only a matter of time before Connor manages to contact me somehow. And honestly, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do when that happens. Maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe it won't be nearly as bad as I'm imagining. If that's true, please tell me. Because I'm starting to panic. I truly believed that part of my life was over forever. The last thing I ever wanted was for that chapter to be opened again. Update 1. To avoid drawing even more attention than this post already has, I'm going to be a little more. After everything that's happened, I'm going to keep some of the details a little more vague, along with information about the people involved. Maybe calling Connor a stalker is a bit dramatic based on what's happened so far, and I'll admit that not much has happened yet. 2 days after an old friend warned me that my ex-husband had been asking about me, I started getting follow requests from him on every social media account I have. He hasn't actually messaged me yet because I never accepted any of the requests. But I have a feeling it's only a matter of time before the messages start. I even noticed that he viewed my LinkedIn profile. Since LinkedIn tells you who has looked at your profile, I know for a fact he searched for me on purpose. Eventually, I worked up the courage to tell my husband, Nathan, everything I had written about in my last post. I told him the whole story. I explained what my marriage to Connor was really like, how much influence Brooke had over him, everything his family put me through, and how he reacted when I told him I was pregnant. Thankfully, the man I'm married to now is nothing like my ex. Nathan listened to everything without interrupting me. He was patient, understanding, and supported me through the entire conversation. When I finally finished telling him the whole story, he wasn't upset that I had kept it from him for so long. Instead, his first concern was making sure I was okay. Right around that time, Connor became even more persistent. Nathan and I talked about what we should do, and we agreed to block every account Connor had used to find me. That ended up being almost every social media platform I have. It honestly felt like he had searched every corner of my online life. Thankfully, all of my accounts are private. I thought blocking him would finally put an end to it. Instead, things only got worse. He started creating fake accounts just so he could send me private messages. Almost every platform I use ended up receiving them. The wording changed from message to message, but the meaning was always exactly the same. He admitted he had made a terrible mistake. He said he wanted to see me. More than anything, he wanted to meet his son. No matter how many accounts I blocked, another one would appear. He kept saying he wasn't going to stop until I agreed to let him see his child. According to him, our son deserved to know his real father. He even claimed that having a biological father was better than growing up with a stepfather. He also wrote that I couldn't understand because, in his opinion, I had always treated step-family relationships the same as blood relationships. The longer I ignored him, the longer his messages became. He kept insisting that he had a right to see his son. Eventually, he even admitted he would continue making new accounts because I couldn't block him forever. At this point, I have no doubt he'll keep trying to contact me. I just hope creating fake accounts is as far as he's willing to take this. Nathan keeps telling me that we're safe and that Connor probably won't do anything dangerous. I want to believe him, but I can't shake this feeling that something isn't right. Update 2. He showed up at my mom's house. After almost 10 years without seeing him, my ex-husband was suddenly standing outside my mother's home because I wouldn't answer his messages. Every Saturday, unless something unexpected comes up, I visit my mom. I always bring my son with me. This time was different. The night before, he had stayed over at a friend's house, so I went by myself that morning. When I pulled into my mom's driveway, I didn't notice the car parked across the street. I also didn't notice the man sitting inside it. Not until I got out of my car. The moment I stepped onto the driveway, the driver opened his door too. He got out and started walking toward me. At first, I was frightened simply because a strange man was approaching me. Then I realized who it was, and the fear didn't disappear. It got worse. There stood Connor, outside my mother's house. Ironically, during our entire marriage, he had never once bothered to come there. The first thing I asked him was, "What are you doing here?" His answer was exactly the same as every message he had been sending me. He wanted to meet his son. He admitted that he had tracked me across the country. Apparently, he found my mother's address through old shipping records connected to my move. All of that. Just because he wanted to see the child he once insisted wasn't his. I still don't know whether I was incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. But in that moment, my fear turned into pure anger. I didn't care that he had found my mother's address. I didn't care that half the neighborhood was probably watching us from behind their curtains. I didn't care that we were standing there alone together for the first time since our divorce. I completely lost it. I yelled at him. I threw every horrible thing he had ever done back in his face. Everything. His only excuse was Brooke. He kept saying she had manipulated him. According to him, he had been emotionally vulnerable and he trusted someone he had known almost his entire life. Then he told me something I never expected to hear. A few months earlier, Brooke had almost gotten married. Before the wedding, she confessed that she had lied to him about everything all those years ago. The moment Connor learned the truth that I had actually been carrying his child, he started trying to find me. None of our old mutual friends were willing to give him my phone number, so he searched for me online instead. When I blocked every account he made, he decided the only way left was to find me in person. He kept repeating that he was desperate to meet his son. That's when I finally told him the truth. I told him he didn't have a son, the stress from his accusations, the divorce, packing up my life and moving back across the country. It all became too much. Just a few months after we separated, I lost the baby. The child he had abandoned before he was even born never got the chance to live. Connor didn't have a son anymore. He didn't have a child. The little boy I call my son isn't Connor's at all. My son is Mason. He's actually Nathan's son from his previous marriage, and after Nathan and I got married, I legally adopted him as my own. Mason has the same red hair I do, and a personality that's every bit as fiery as mine. In one strange way, Connor had been right about something. I've always believed that family isn't defined only by blood. To me, the family you choose is every bit as real as the family you're born into. So, yes, I have a son, but Connor doesn't. By that point, I had been yelling for so long that my mother and stepfather came outside to see what was happening. Several neighbors came out too after hearing all the shouting. Whether it was because people were watching or because he was completely stunned by what I'd told him, I don't know. But when my stepfather calmly told Connor it was time for him to leave, he turned around and walked away without saying another word. Maybe I should have told him the truth from the beginning, instead of blocking him and ignoring every message he sent. But honestly, how was I supposed to know he'd end up standing outside my mother's house? All I wanted was for him to know the truth and finally leave me and my family alone. I just hoped that after hearing everything, he'd go back to his own life and stay as far away from us as possible. Update 3. Looking back now, I probably should have known it wasn't going to be that simple. Not after Connor had chased me across the country because he was convinced he had a son out there somewhere. I'll admit something. When I called him a stalker in my earlier updates, part of me was exaggerating. It was my way of coping with the fact that he had suddenly reappeared after almost a decade. Yes, he had searched for all my social media accounts and kept trying to contact me. But there's a huge difference between quietly watching someone's online activity and actually stalking them in real life. Unfortunately, Connor was more than willing to cross that line. I honestly don't know why I expected him to believe me when I told him Mason wasn't his child. Because he isn't. Mason isn't biologically related to me at all. The only reason he's my son is because I married his father and later adopted him. We don't share any blood. The fact that Mason and I both have red hair is nothing more than a funny coincidence that Nathan and I always joked was fate bringing us together. Looking back, expecting Connor to suddenly believe me was probably naive. After all, the entire reason our marriage ended was because he refused to believe anything I told him. I honestly don't know what I expected. Maybe I hoped he'd finally accept the truth and disappear from my life forever. Instead, a few days after the confrontation at my mother's house, I started noticing his car. At first, I only saw it parked near my street for a few moments. I convinced myself I was imagining things. The second time it happened, I mentioned it to Nathan. After that, both of us started paying much closer attention. Sure enough, the same car kept showing up. Every time we noticed it, Connor would drive away before we had the chance to confront him. After about 2 weeks of this, we finally went to the police. We had taken several photographs of his car parked near both my house and my mother's. I honestly believed that would be enough. Surely the police would take seriously the fact that my ex-husband was following us because he believed my child belonged to him. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. The officers admitted the situation looked suspicious, but they also told us they couldn't arrest someone simply for sitting in a parked car near our home. Since he hadn't threatened us directly or committed any crime, there wasn't much they could legally do. So, once again, we were on our own. Update 4. For the first time in a long while, I finally have some good news. Connor is no longer going to be a threat to me or my family. After trying everything we could to convince the police to step in before something happened, we finally got the evidence they needed to arrest him. In my last update, I mentioned that Connor had started hanging around Mason's school. By then, it was obvious what he wanted. He genuinely believed Mason was his son, and it seemed like he intended to take him no matter what I said. Neither Nathan nor I were ever going to let that happen. Thankfully, one of our neighbors works as a teacher at Mason's school. She knew everything that had been happening and agreed to help us. Because of her, we were able to stay one step ahead. We knew Connor would eventually make a move. All we could do was wait. In the meantime, we informed the school's office and every member of the staff about the situation. We made it absolutely clear that Mason was never to leave the school with anyone except me, Nathan, or our neighbor. A few days later, exactly what we expected finally happened. Right in the middle of the school day, Connor walked into the school office. He calmly told the staff that he had come to pick Mason up for me because there had been an emergency involving his grandmother. He even used my mother's name, probably hoping that would make his story sound believable. The office staff followed the plan. They told him they would need to call me before releasing Mason. Connor immediately tried to stop them. He insisted I was too busy dealing with the family emergency to answer the phone. When they still refused to hand Mason over, he pretended he was going to call me himself. Then he walked out of the building. Of course, he never called. Instead, he went back to his car and waited outside the school. The staff contacted me immediately and told me everything that had happened, exactly as we had planned. The entire conversation inside the office had also been recorded on the school's security cameras. When school ended that afternoon, the students were dismissed as usual. But Mason stayed safely inside his classroom with our neighbor. A few moments later, the police arrived. They had the video footage in their possession. They walked straight over to Connor's car and arrested him while he was still waiting outside the school. When the officers searched Connor's car, they found something far more disturbing than any of us expected. Inside the vehicle were 2 airline tickets back to his home state. They also discovered a bottle of powerful prescription sedatives. The investigators believe he planned to drug Mason before taking him away. After that discovery, Connor was arrested immediately. He remained in custody while waiting for trial, where prosecutors charged him with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, child endangerment, and several other offenses that were added as the investigation continued. For the first time in a long time, it finally felt like our nightmare was coming to an end. Update 5. Several months have passed since my last update. Connor is now serving time in prison. I'm intentionally not listing every charge he was convicted of because I don't want anyone identifying him or tracing this story back to me. What I can say is that he'll be behind bars for years. Personally, I wish the sentence had been even longer. The convictions included the kidnapping related charges I mentioned before, along with several additional offenses. There were still a few charges that didn't stick, which honestly still doesn't make much sense to me. But at the end of the day, he's in prison, and that's what matters. During the investigation, Connor claimed the sedatives belonged to him personally. Technically, that part was true. He had a valid prescription and had been taking them after learning the truth about what happened all those years ago. Even so, when investigators looked at the medication alongside the plane tickets and everything else he had planned, the picture became incredibly disturbing. The evidence suggested he intended to use those pills as part of his plan to take Mason. On top of everything else, the court granted restraining orders protecting me, Nathan, and Mason. If Connor ever comes anywhere near Mason's school after his release, he'll be violating that order immediately. During the court proceedings, an official DNA test finally settled the issue once and for all. It confirmed exactly what I'd been saying from the beginning. Mason is Nathan's biological son. My medical records were also submitted with my permission. They confirmed that only a few months after Connor and I separated, I suffered a miscarriage. In the end, Connor destroyed his own life over a child who no longer existed. Everything he did, every lie he believed, every decision he made, only led him to prison for absolutely nothing. And somehow there was still one final twist. Brooke actually showed up at the trial. She put on an emotional performance, acting completely devastated that Connor was being sent to prison. Not long after that, her own husband publicly walked away from their marriage. Apparently, she had spent weeks posting messages online, defending Connor and supporting him. On one of those posts, her husband finally responded publicly. He told her that if she cared so much about Connor, she was welcome to go visit him in prison since she clearly couldn't stop talking about him. From what friends back in that city have told me, their divorce is already underway. As for me, I blocked Brooke and everyone connected to Connor on every platform I could think of. I don't want any path left that could bring those people back into my life. Update 6. It turns out that a lot of people in the comments were right. Brooke and Connor really were together? I'll admit I had suspected it myself. Apparently, that relationship was one of the main reasons Brooke's own marriage almost fell apart. I still don't know exactly when it started. Maybe they were involved while Connor and I were still married. Maybe it began before we ever got married. Or maybe it happened after our divorce. I honestly have no way of knowing. What is obvious now is that Brooke never truly let go of him. I guess everything worked out exactly the way she wanted. Now she gets to visit Connor in prison during approved visitation. At least she no longer has to sneak around behind her husband's back whenever she wanted to spend time with Connor. Obviously, prison visits aren't exactly the same as meeting in some expensive hotel. But I suppose life doesn't always give people the ending they imagined. The funniest part of all this is how I found out. Brooke actually emailed me. Yes. She seriously thought sending me a message full of insults and hateful comments was a good idea. Most of the email was her bragging. She wanted me to believe she had won because, thanks to all the lies she fed Connor over the years, she had finally ended up with him. For a moment, I considered replying that the only prize she'd won was a pathetic man sitting in prison. I wanted to be the bigger person. Well, that's not entirely true. I absolutely replied. I said exactly what I wanted to say. Then I blocked her immediately afterward. I'm sure she probably wrote several more angry emails after that. Fortunately, I'll never have to read them. What a shame. Maybe taking the high road would have been more mature. But honestly, Getting the last word felt surprisingly therapeutic. Sometimes a little immaturity is good for the soul. Update 7. I found out something today that honestly left even me speechless. The moment I got home, I knew I had to share it. Connor was assaulted in prison. Before anyone starts feeling sorry for him, he's alive and expected to recover. From what I've been told, inmates don't react kindly when they learn someone tried to kidnap a child. Let's just say he received a very clear message about how people like him are viewed behind bars. For years, Connor tried to present himself as the victim. He manipulated people, blamed everyone else, and acted like he deserved sympathy. None of that means anything inside prison. Those tactics don't work there, and it seems he learned that lesson the hard way.